The consensus narrative focuses on hypersonic missiles, a legacy threat model. The true vector of systemic risk is not a hypersonic launch, it is absolute silence. While media outlets broadcast conventional force projections, the strategic calculus has already inverted. The actual targets are not military bases. They are the fragile, uninsurable nerve bundles of the global economy, the subsea data cables, and the orbital satellite relays. RUSI and CSIS analysts have modeled this with chilling clarity. An adversary facing a domestic solvency crisis, as seen with Iran's currency devaluation, has zero incentive for a high-cost kinetic exchange. The blueprint is asymmetric. Low-cost autonomous underwater vehicles and directed energy weapons are the accelerants. Their mission is not physical destruction, it is signal denial, to sever data flow, to induce a systemic coma. This creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower whose own financial system exhibits extreme fragility and whose conventional kinetic power is being methodically reduced, as evidenced by the deactivation of attack squadrons, is suddenly deaf and blind. The global financial system, which BPI reports show is already a top concern, would freeze. Command and control evaporates. The Leviathan is cornered, unable to see the attacker or absorb the economic shock. In this state, conventional deterrence fails. A protracted response is fiscally impossible. The mathematical certainty is that the only remaining leverage is a launch-on-warning protocol with overwhelming, disproportionate force. The silent vector does not de-escalate conflict. It provides a direct, non-negotiable pathway to the highest possible stage of escalation as a compensatory measure. This is not a mistake. It is the design. An adversary's primary motive for conflict is not strength, but systemic weakness. The trigger is a domestic solvency crisis. When a regime faces internal collapse from events like hyperinflation and currency devaluation, as documented during protests in Iran, it reaches a terminal phase. The political liability of inaction becomes infinite. War ceases to be a geopolitical tool. It becomes a financial transaction to export the crisis and reset the domestic ledger. This is not theoretical. According to analysis cited by RUSI, the conflict in Ukraine serves as the primary modern blueprint. The war was framed not as an act of expansion, but as a mechanism to manage a severe domestic liability, an unpopular government, and a fragile economic outlook. The Kremlin converted a predictable internal crisis into an external kinetic event. This is the playbook. When the balance sheet at home is broken, you open a new one abroad through force. A nation facing a solvency crisis cannot afford the kinetic cost of a conventional peer-to-peer war. Its industrial base and financial reserves are compromised. This is not a barrier, it is an accelerant. Weakness forces a strategic pivot to asymmetry. As detailed in analyses of modern warfare, the objective becomes maximizing the target's liability at minimal cost to the attacker. AI-driven drones and other low-cost systems are not just new weapons. They are the perfect financial instruments for a bankrupt aggressor. The final calculation is a simple risk assessment. The cost of an asymmetric strike is negligible. The potential return, destabilizing a rival whose own financial system shows fragility, is immense. As the U.S. deactivates conventional assets like the Army's attack helicopter squadron in South Korea, it broadcasts a lower capacity to absorb or respond to a high-volume, low-cost attack. The adversary sees a mathematical invitation. Weakness compels them to act, and our weakness incentivizes them to do so. The central calculation is the economics of lethality. Analysts at institutions like the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, have modeled the core asymmetry. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank, a pinnacle of conventional kinetic power. On the other, a $500 AI-guided drone. This is not a 10-to-1 or 100-to-1 cost disparity. It is a 10,000-to-1 inversion of kinetic cost. An adversary can deploy 10,000 attempts to liquidate one of your primary assets for the same price. This is what is referred to as the democratization of violence. The state monopoly on high-impact force projection has been mathematically broken. The barrier to entry is no longer industrial capacity, it's a credit card. An adversary facing a domestic solvency crisis and currency devaluation is not just enabled, but incentivized to arbitrage this cost curve. They can bleed a superpower's balance sheet without deploying a single soldier, turning a nation's most expensive military assets into stranded liabilities on the battlefield. While a nation's planners focus on deactivating conventional assets like attack helicopter squadrons, they are simultaneously increasing their systemic liability. Each reduction in conventional defensive capability, when paired with the fragility of the underlying financial system, creates a vacuum. This vacuum is filled by low-cost, high-impact accelerants. The strategic calculus shifts from attrition warfare to balance sheet warfare. The objective is not to win on the field, but to trigger a solvency event in the homeland. Conflict does not initiate at the heart of an empire. It begins at the periphery, in the system's designated blind spots. CSIS refers to these as gray zones, areas of pronounced regional instability. These are not the cause of the coming conflict. They are the staging grounds. They are proxy laboratories where low-cost, high-impact attacks are engineered before being launched against a system's critical vulnerabilities. The activation signal for these laboratories is an adversary's domestic solvency crisis. Reports confirm widespread protests and strikes in nations like Iran, directly linked to currency devaluation and inflation. For a regime facing internal collapse, an externalized, asymmetric operation becomes a non-negotiable pressure release. It is a mathematical certainty. The kinetic cost is low. The potential strategic reward is immense. The weapon of choice is the asymmetric accelerant. According to Vocal.media, AI-driven drones are fundamentally transforming modern warfare. A container of these assets can be positioned within any failed state or unstable region, providing plausible deniability. This isn't conventional warfare. It's a targeted strike against systemic liability, launched from a territory where attribution is designed to be impossible. The result is a strategic trap. As a nation's kinetic power is deliberately reduced, evidenced by the deactivation of assets like the U.S. Army's attack helicopter squadron in South Korea, while its financial system flashes warning signs of fragility as documented by the Bank Policy Institute, its capacity to absorb a gray zone attack approaches zero. The unstable periphery is no longer a humanitarian issue. It is a launch-on-warning vector pointed directly at the core. Launch-on-warning is not a policy. It is a mathematical protocol. It exists to solve a time and distance problem. Once an adversary's missile launch is detected, there is a finite window, typically under 30 minutes, before your own assets are neutralized. To wait for impact is to forfeit the capacity to retaliate. The doctrine, therefore, dictates launching a counterstrike based on the initial warning data alone. It is a zero-sum function of physics. This entire protocol is contingent upon the integrity of data from early warning systems. The critical vulnerability is not kinetic, it is digital. An adversary, driven by a domestic solvency crisis, such as currency devaluation, has a powerful incentive to exploit this vector. As documented by RUSI, a targeted cyber attack does not need to destroy a silo. It only needs to blind the radar, or, more critically, corrupt the data feed. This creates the fog of digital war. The command authority is now confronted with two possibilities, neither of which is verifiable. Possibility 1. The system is blind, and a real attack is inbound. Failure to launch results in decapitation. Possibility 2. The alert is a sophisticated digital phantom, an AI-driven spoof designed to trigger a catastrophic error. Launching initiates global escalation based on a ghost. The commander is now forced to launch, not on warning, but on the absence of reliable warning. The fear is not of the incoming weapon, but of the ambiguity itself. The system's own protocol, when subjected to an asymmetric cyber accelerant, forces the commander's hand. This is the ultimate strategic trap, where the only available response to a digital event is a disproportionate kinetic escalation. The convergence of a domestic solvency crisis and access to asymmetric accelerants creates a predictable vector for strategic probing. Based on adversary analysis from RUSI and observed kinetic drawdowns, the next 12 months will feature a calibration shot against U.S. critical infrastructure. The event will manifest as a non-kinetic, attribution-impossible blackout of a primary data center hub servicing Wall Street. The mechanism will be a coordinated swarm of AI-piloted drones, per CSI's threat models, executing a precise strike, not on the buildings, but on external power and cooling substations. The objective is not physical destruction, it is systemic paralysis. This is a mathematical test. It measures the financial system's response to an unsourced shock, exploiting the fragility indicated by Bank Policy Institute metrics. It confirms the liability created by the deactivation of conventional Overwatch assets, such as the 5th Air Cavalry Squadron. The event is designed to force a disproportionate escalation response, exposing it as the only remaining protocol. It is not an attack. It is a data point for a future zero-sum transaction,